I was the first baby to be born in the St Andrews Almshouses. That was in 2020, and a number of children in our housing group, including my own, have been born on the site since then. The first contact my parents had with St Andrews was when they met with others in the building separate from, but connected to, the Methodist Church known as the Sanctuary. Here they discussed prenatal arrangements and gave and received support from other expectant couples. The space is beautiful. It's used for a number of other purposes. Sometimes a body is laid out in there before a funeral service at the church. People of all faiths meet there to discuss belief. Groups meet to discuss end-of-life issues. If a person is ill or dying in the nearby hospital, sometimes their family members spend time here for respite, but they're close by if they need to quickly return to the hospital to see their loved one. It smells faintly of linseed oil. The volunteers who help out at St Andrews put it on the reclaimed oak floorboards. There's a picture window looking out from the space into a small courtyard with a cherry tree. Lots of natural light comes in through the glass roof above. The St Andrews Almshouses soon became the loose term for all of the different dwellings on the site. Some were directly funded by the church in order to encourage social inclusion for a wide variety of people, but particularly the elderly or infirm, which was of course the traditional historic function of the almshouse. A large number of the houses were also self-built by members of the St Andrews Co-housing Community, or STAC, comprising all ages and faiths, and including my parents who are Methodists. We pay an annual ground rent to the church, who owns the freehold. Some of the houses are rented from the church, fully or partially, in which case some equity is accrued. All of the rents are means tested and adjusted according to our changing economic circumstances. In this respect, people feel very secure here. A number of the builders had actually been homeless. An organisation called Halifax Action to Create Homes, or Hatch, sought out grant funding to enable them to build. Many have continued to run green building businesses since. Some have stayed at Hatch and used their experience to enable other homeless people to build and renovate properties in the region. The co-housing model had proved very successful in North America and Northern Europe. Essentially, people have their own private space, but they share other spaces and facilities. There are a number of social, economic and environmental advantages with this model, and there was a strong will in many groups in the locality to adopt it. The church recognised the difficulty of bringing together such a group with a suitable site and the necessary finance, and was enormously helpful in this respect. When the private houses were completed, STAC built a common house. People can rent sleeping space here if they're visiting members of our community, or they need to be close to the hospital or to take part in conferences in the main hall and the church complex. Sometimes we eat together there. We have regular meetings in the common house to decide how best to move forward as an intentional community of people, and we celebrate there, and we often enjoy making music and dancing. It was agreed from the beginning that the development of the St Andrews site would be an exemplar of sustainable living. Every single decision would be considered from an ethical, social, economic and environmentally sustainable perspective, and this wasn't always easy because the established unsustainable ways of doing things were so ingrained. But the Methodist tradition of radical thought and socially responsible action was a huge and continuing inspiration. My parents explained that many of the initiatives that were adopted weren't unique in themselves, there were precedents in many other places, but what made this project so special and so successful was the amalgamation and the subsequent codependence of such a large number of separate groups and initiatives. Here the whole is much greater than the sum of its parts, and it struck a chord in the mainstream. Of course, having working examples of other successful initiatives was enormously helpful. The pioneering group visited many other projects and learnt a great deal from them, and they were then able to develop realistic business plans for the purposes of sourcing grants and borrowing money from ethical investment lenders. A massive effort was also made to make contact with as many potential user groups as possible to ensure economic and social sustainability for the church. Most already existed, but some were created in direct response to the project, having identified gaps in social care and well-being. Many were Christian groups, some were founded by other faiths, and some had close connections with health, and in particular to the nearby hospital, and others with education. Many of these original separate entities have combined over the years, evolving in order to meet changing needs. Networking with like-minded groups has always been a key to learning and support, and was especially helpful during difficult times when the task felt overwhelming. In turn, we've inspired and supported many others to try alternative approaches over the years. In the early days, when car parking was a more important issue, a subterranean parking area was created beneath the site, and above it a public square was created, defined loosely by a number of different buildings with different uses. To the north is the church, to the east the sanctuary, and a number of ancillary spaces, to the west the cafe and a new hall, and to the south the houses. These give the square life from morning until night. Originally, the car park was open to one side, and as car use declined, it gradually became occupied by small workshops and homework units. The heating and power plant is also under the square, fuelled from renewable sources and used to service all of the buildings on the site without creating any pollution. The church is the energy provider, and their fuel charges are means tested or subsidised for charity groups. Whoever is using the rented spaces clocks in and out on the energy meter and pays the church directly for the energy that they've actually used. We encourage energy consciousness here. The church uses some of the profits from this to invest in other renewable energy projects in the region. Of course, the buildings require very little heating because many take advantage of solar gains by orientating their large windows and sun spaces towards the south, and they've been built to a very high standard of insulation and airtightness. Heat that could have been wasted by ventilation is recovered and recycled. The cafe has always been the social centre of the St Andrews community, and here we mix with lots of people from the neighbourhood and beyond. It has a beautiful roof terrace with spectacular views, and some of the food that's served here is grown in raised planters on the roof and on ad hoc landscaped areas scattered about the site. We consulted Incredible Edible in Todmorden and the Permaculture Association when we were developing the site. The cafe also offers free food to the adjacent allotment owners in exchange for their surplus vegetables, as long as they've been grown organically. Local exchange trading systems, or LETs, have been adopted here by many. We also take their advice and help with what will grow well here. Children are especially encouraged to help with the planting and food production, and local schools are keen to use the site and our activities as a learning resource. Other food for the cafe and the St Andrews community is locally sourced wherever possible. We try to avoid packaged and processed foods because these have such an enormous negative impact on the environment. The cafe also functions as a small pop-up shop which distributes whole foods bought in bulk. Cookery classes are very popular, and we have a number of different events such as lunch clubs which encourage healthy eating and social interaction. The church building, dating from 1965, is my favourite architectural space at St Andrews. The tarmacked car park to the north of the church was substantially landscaped, and that meant that the view through the original windows in the church was utterly transformed. There's still a drop-off point for vehicles and some disabled parking spaces there, but the church looks so much more beautiful in its new setting. It has subsequently become a very popular wedding venue. The community choir rehearse and perform publicly in the space. Music recitals are frequent, and I am often moved by the beauty of the music that I hear in the church. State-of-the-art sound and presentation technology were installed in the building, and groups ranging from local history societies to the University of the Third Age make good use of it. Of course, Methodists have always been committed to education and learning, and we've revived the Sunday school and often host lectures, sometimes using the format of Peccha Kucha 2020, which is incredibly stimulating. Films and documentaries followed by discussion groups are a regular event too. When our services and gatherings at the church end, often we'll spend time together at the cafe and our children play safely in the courtyard. There are a number of interconnected play spaces across the site, which of course I loved as a child. One of them has boxes, sticks and rope, nets and hay bales that children can do whatever they want with. The time I spent playing in this area must have influenced my decision to study architecture. In summer, the fountains in the courtyard are a great source of fun and amusement for children and for adults. People love to come to our site. There's water everywhere. After the great flood of 2018, it finally seemed to hit home that nature can't always be controlled and that our symbiotic relationship with nature must be understood better. And members of our community volunteer to help with the consequent construction of the natural dams and the moorland wet areas and the massive programme of tree planting. Many of the buildings on the site have green roofs, which slow rainwater runoff. All of them have rainwater catchment for watering the planted terraces and the garden areas, and some of the more radical self-builders have dry composting toilets. The grey water from the common laundrette, baths and sinks are reused in a cycle which flushes toilets, and some of the water is held in small ponds and reed beds which provide beautiful, amazingly diverse habitats. The scope of the wildlife here is incredible considering the size of the site, and the water which leaves our site leaves slowly, and wherever possible it is already clean. The church was ecologically refurbished and made more accessible to elderly people and the disabled, who are now actually able to use all areas of the site without assistance. Buildings are linked together to form a complex of multifunctional spaces with inherent flexibility. The appearance of the site has been improved beyond recognition. It looks as different today as it did back in 2016 when compared with the buildings that were originally built in 1912. What was essentially a numb clutter of disparate buildings now has a strong coherence and a presence on the main Huddersfield Road. The site is now a very popular local landmark, and the design of the buildings, although bold, is sensitive to the conservation area context. Most of the existing buildings from 2016 were removed. Materials were set aside and reclaimed for use on the site where possible, or redistributed locally. We placed a regional limit on obtaining materials and sourced them locally wherever possible, and because of the topography of the existing site, there was a period of excavation where earth was used either as a natural embankment to protect the site from the main road, or it was used later to shelter the north side of the buildings. Some was even used as a building material, rammed within timber frameworks to create beautiful organic walls. The architects appointed by the church were on tap, not on top, and facilitated rigorous consultation of the church group, potential user groups and the wider community. They collated feedback and subsequent development was informed by that. This wasn't lip service consultation. This was creating the community in advance of building and enabling people to feel a sense of ownership and responsibility for the site. The perceived lack of interest in the site from the initial consultation with the immediate community was identified as a key issue, and to address this, people in the neighbourhood were invited to a consultation event at the church at which tea and cake were offered, children were entertained, a band played later in the day. A large-scale model of the site was featured for them to stick flags into, on which they'd written ideas and opinions. There were small maps of the site which they could annotate and post-it notes for adding to a wall of broad strands and topics, aims and dilemmas, set out to prompt trains of thought and invite further ideas. There were church members, people from the current user groups, those from potential user groups, members of similar projects across the region, with stalls explaining what their group were doing and the process that had taken them there. members of other faith groups, local and national press, representatives from the council and local politicians, anybody and everybody of relevance was invited. It was a hugely inspiring day. It was also really well attended because they'd leafleted houses and people were then canvassed and reminded nearer the day, and travel arrangements were made for people with reduced mobility. Everybody at the consultation was encouraged to bring along friends and family. Social media played a big part. The architects had set up the My St Andrews project with its own Facebook page and Twitter feed, and people who couldn't attend were also able to contribute via social media if they wanted to. Consequently, we got a sense of how the site could become a popular focus for local people and local families and the wider community. The results of the consultation were collated by the architects. In collaboration with a multidisciplinary team involving renewable energy experts, permaculture designers, new economics practitioners and a number of interested local groups, a loose framework for the development of the site was put into place. Giving so many people the opportunity to contribute to the design and construction of their own environment has led to one which is far richer than any individual person or architectural practice could have designed. I don't think the founders could ever have imagined how important their legacy would be. St Andrews very quickly became a flagship project, analysed and documented by social anthropologists, economists and sustainable building technologists, and inspiring Methodist churches far and wide. For me, I simply love where I live and the people who live and visit here. Life feels very rich at St Andrews.